friends and listeners. In today's episode, we are going to talk to our guest, Mr. Dan Blier. Dan is a natural leader and accomplished administrator with more than 15 years of experience in the CTE and computer science education fields. Anywhere he works, he sets the direction of the organization, builds a superior team, and ensures that the vision becomes reality. He is currently the computer science curriculum specialist for the grades K12 at the Plano ISD. Dan holds a master's in information systems from University of Phoenix. Dan is on the steering committee for CS for Texas and is part of the Texas Exploring Computing Education Pathways team. Originally from Maine, Dan has now been in the DFW area for about 20 years. Dan lives in Dallas with his 12-year-old Jack Russell Terrier named Georgie. He has previously worked as a teacher for the DeSoto ISD, Louisville ISD, and Uplift Education. For Uplift Education, he also worked as a CTE coordinator. Dan, welcome to our show, Let's Talk Computer Science. Dan, can you tell me anything about your story? Why, I know you are a computer science expert. Why did you switch to teaching?
Well, I worked in the field back in the 90s. We actually had a company here in the Dallas area. Actually, the poster over my shoulder is one of the posters from our company. It was called the Problem Solving Company. And we built websites and intranets for various companies and such. And most of our customers were in the travel industries. So everything that sailed the oceans, we touched every one of those active cruise ships and labeled them and made everything ready for the internet. So a lot of big projects, but of course, when the .com went burst, so did our funding sources from our customers, and so I decided to make a change and decided that some of the engagements I had with business people showed me that there was a need for more ethics trainings, but at younger ages. And so that's why I came into education.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's well said. Can you tell me a little bit about CSTA organization and your role at CSTA?
Yes. Computer Science Teachers Association is the largest organization for computer science teachers in the United States. We also have chapters in Canada, and we just recently approved one for the Philippines. Our organization also hosts the largest computer science teachers conference for American teachers. That usually is held every July. Last year, we hosted it as a virtual conference, and again, this year will be a virtual conference. And my role in the organization is I am the Dallas-Fort Worth CSTA president, and I have been for the last few years. They keep re-electing me for some reason. And then on the national CSBA board, am the district representative, and just recently at our July meeting was elected to be the chair-elect. And in coming July, I will serve as the board chair for the next 2 years.
Wow, congratulations.
In addition to that role, part of that role is being one of the chairs. We meet every 2 weeks with our executive director, Jake Baskin, to talk through things that are happening in the organization. We also have a monthly executive committee meeting that I'm on. I'm also the chair of the Nominations Elections Committee, which we're about to start that process for the next elections. And I've been working with a group of educators on the CSTA Standards for Teachers Committee, and we've been creating some resources that are about to roll out actually next week.
Wow. I mean, yeah, that is super impressive. you are impacting our future indirectly. And I feel like CS education is so important for this generation, and you're playing a crucial role in that for the entire country. Congratulations and thanks for doing that. Can you talk a little bit about the state of computer science K12 education, specifically in Texas and in the country in general?
Yeah, so part of the work that I've been doing here in the state of Texas has been to work with the CS for Texas Task Force. And what we've been trying to do is identify areas where we can improve computer science education. And one of the opportunities I had with yesterday was meeting with the governor's office to talk about possible funding for some of that work. We've been working on so about a year and a half ago, the legislature passed a bill that called for a K12 computer science strategic planning committee. However, because of COVID, it never met. And so we are going back to the legislature and asking for funding to make sure that that gets implemented. We're also talking about how to increase funding for professional development of teachers and making sure that we have enough certified computer science teachers in the state. One of the issues that we're finding is that there aren't a lot of computer science certified teachers, and we have just here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, I'm aware of a few teachers that are going to retire at the end of this year. And so, if you extrapolate that across the state, that's a scary thought. And so we need to increase the number of certified teachers and make sure that they're well trained and well supported through that process. One of the cool things that happened also during that legislative session a couple of years ago was to move our technology applications courses under CTE. All of our computer science courses were under the technology applications TEKS and now under the CTE TEKS. That means that we received the same weighted funding, or 0.35% more of funding than we were before. So that makes sure that there's enough money in place for districts to continue these courses and make sure that it also helps to engage the districts in adding these courses because of the additional funding. As for the United States, some of the work we've been working on is making sure that we are creating equitable programs. We have an issue where our Hispanic and African Americans are not participating in computer science at the same levels as their Asian and white partners. And so, if we're truly going to have an equitable system, and since computing is part of our everyday lives, there's nowhere you can turn without touching a computer, whether it's your cell phone or today while we're on this podcast, or for educators during COVID right now, it's our Zooms or Teams or all of those types of resources. And so we just need to make sure that we have enough, opportunities for those students. One of the areas that we've noted that's an issue in Texas is that we have about 1,100 schools or districts that don't have any computer science courses at all. Most of those exist in the rural areas. So if you're a rural student, you're not even getting an opportunity to even try to take the course because it's not even offered. So we're working really heavy on that piece. We've also identified that even in the post-secondary area, 60% of the current jobs are STEM, and in that STEM realm, those are computing jobs. However, only 10% of those STEM majors are computing majors. And so, if you start to think about the numbers, that's the problem. We found that for the last 12 months, we've had about 53,000 open computing positions just here in Texas. And so if we're not training people to take on those positions, we're leaving companies without the right skilled workers.
Like the problem is building up, and yeah, I can see. So those 1,100 schools, is it just Texas or across the entire country?
Just Texas alone.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right on when you're saying like the issue is only increasing as they're growing, as the kids are growing, and you're right on the equity. Like no matter what career you choose, you cannot avoid computers. And they might not grow up to be a computer science programmer, but they still need to have a fundamental understanding of computers, how computers think.
Absolutely.
Yep. So what do you think schools need to improve the K12 CS education?
Well, the first thing that we need in our schools is qualified teachers. And so if we're not spending money on funding the ability for more teachers to get certified and focusing on that, it's really hard to grow a program if you don't have teachers to teach it. And so with, as I referenced earlier, we've got teachers that are about to retire. We're also having an issue where, a computer science teacher who is well-skilled can go to the industry and make almost twice as much as they make as a teacher. And so, we've lost a few teachers that way as well. And so if we're constantly pulling teachers out of the classroom for those several reasons, and we're not adding new ones at that rate or higher, we can't grow the amount of opportunities across our state and even across the country. I would say that like one of the issues that we've found too is it's really hard for us to identify in the state of Texas and many other states what kids are engaging in computer science or coding in K-8. So because there's not a specific course, unlike a math, science, social studies, or language arts, where those things are tied to like a test or something like that, you don't know if these kids are getting any kind of
education
opportunities, but even what the quality of that is. And in no way am I saying that we want to have testing in computer science. In addition to adding those teachers, once we get those teachers in place, we need them to have professional learning opportunities. And so that means that either districts and schools have to pay for teachers to participate, or the state and the federal government need to bring in some funds to allow that to happen. Unfortunately, in some cases, the only time teachers get these opportunities is they have to pay for it out of their pockets. And we want to try to remove those barriers to entry, because that's not always possible depending on your personal income and other personal scenarios that you have. And the final thing would be just looking at our campus and district administrators. There are not a lot of people like me in my role across the country. And so often computer science teachers are the only ones in their school, or sometimes the only one in their district. And so there isn't somebody on there as an administrator who understands what it is they do and what their needs are. And so if you don't have somebody who can advocate for you as an administrator, sometimes the teachers are kind of get stuck. They have a trouble where they hit a wall with getting access to resources, and they can't move anything forward. But having an advocate at the school level, at the district level, definitely helps to keep those impediments from becoming an issue.
Yep, I mean, you are definitely very unique, and probably like we might not be able to find another Dan Blier, like for so many reasons. And to just begin with how you have switched to this role from the other side, like there already, as you touched on in between, like there's already their high paying jobs and high demand jobs, and having them come and like leaving all of that and coming and becoming a teacher, that is very amazing that you have done for our community. And everything you have said, like there's so much to unpack. Probably we could talk days on everything that you touched on, like the shortage of teachers, the pay, and how we need to start early on so that suddenly they're not introduced in high school for computer science.
Right.
Yeah. How do you think our K12 CS education is in comparison to the rest of the world?
So in the United States, we're making really good strides in computer science education. There's a partnership with K12 where they've identified 9 different policy pieces that will help computer science education. And so part of, computer, CS for Texas is part of that group that's trying to identify ways to bring in legislation to help with those, ways for us to grow, make sure the funding is in place, make sure the right policies are in place, and such. U.S. Department of Education has provided funding through Title II, through Title IV. The National Science Foundation has been funding research to improve computer science education in K-12. So those are all different things that we're doing at the national level that hopefully will continue to grow and evolve our computer science programs. In comparison, other countries kind of have a national policy. And so I think, the federalist point of view of our government, where the states have specific responsibilities for schools and things like that, makes it a little harder to have a national policy that's consistent across the states. And so where you have like countries like England who have really put in a across the board implementation and expectation that students will have these same opportunities, we're not quite as consistent here in the United States, but we are certainly working towards that goal.
Yep, I agree. Like as much advanced as we are, and I think whatever we are doing, I'm sure our quality is probably really very good. Not that I compared, but I can just say that I feel I'm pretty safe on that. But I agree, like more countries are implementing national policies around computer science education, and that does help everyone in the education industry. Like I'm familiar, like the Indian Prime Minister, they just announced a major change in education policy, and one of the key components were every kid needs to be introduced to computer science from grade 6 and up. So that's a huge commitment that he did, and that's needed. And
that's great.
Yeah. What does CS teachers need to make their job easier?
So a few things. I think one of the most important pieces is that intangible time. Having the ability to have the time to plan lessons, to do professional development, and just to collaborate with other teachers and things like that. And so that's a very important piece that sometimes gets left out. And so, teachers are supposed to have specific planning time, but sometimes that planning time gets taken away for other reasons. And so as they lose that, then that means that they have to dip into their time with their families, and there's not you don't get to take, unlike more money, time is never one of those things that moves in or moves out. And so we want to make sure that some time is protected for teachers in that way. Having professional learning opportunities is the second one. Having the ability to work with other teachers that are teaching the same thing as them and collaborating with them and discussing and learning from each other is so important. Especially in our computer science field, we have a lot of computer science teachers that are the only one on their campus, and sometimes the only one in their district, and sometimes the next person is 100 miles away. And so we want to make sure that they have ways to connect to each other. I think one of the benefits that has come out of COVID-19 has kind of pushed us to use more of the technology like Zoom and things like that we didn't before. I think we were so focused on getting everybody in a room physically together, and now we've kind of seen that, oh, you can really do a lot of the same stuff virtually, especially when everyone's so far apart. It's still nice to get everybody in a room, and I look forward to someday having people in a room together. But right now it's not the time. Resources like updated hardware, software, even like for cybersecurity kids, having a closed network where they're allowed to actually play and make changes without the district having to worry about, oh, it's going to impact the rest of the network and stuff like that. And so, those are things that I think constantly come up with computer science teachers, especially the ones that are trying to be innovative and trying to be forward thinking and make sure getting the kids to have opportunities that are above and beyond what normally would happen. And so having those opportunities and having that in place would be great. And then funding, money doesn't solve everything, but it sure helps. The latest research shows that the average teacher spends about $250 out of their own pocket. And so having money available for teachers that allows them to, even if it was just that $250, that where they could decide where to prioritize those funds would definitely help and such.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, as you have said, like a computer science, and on top of it, it keeps changing, right? Like the versions keep changing, and like you have one computer science teacher, and like you cannot expect that one computer science teacher to be expert at Java, at cybersecurity, at AI, VR. There's a lot to unpack there as well.
It sure is. And, unlike other subjects, not to knock like an English teacher or a math teacher, but, the English language doesn't really change very much or as quickly as, computer science languages and technologies. And so, although they still have to do professional learning and such, the climb is not as high in some instances.
Right. Totally. Yep. So if you have a magic wand to improve K12 CS education, what would you do?
Well, the first thing is I would grow money trees everywhere outside of every high school, every K12 campus and district, to make sure that, whatever their needs are, they have ability to cover those costs. The second one would just making sure that we have an overwhelming number of computer science certified teachers. We want the problem to be that we have to choose from a bunch of candidates, as opposed to we have to struggle to find just one qualified candidate to fill a position. Because that's about where we are right now, is that we don't have enough CS certified teachers. So what you see in a region is usually teacher A moves here, so that opens this position, so then the next person moves there, and so that we just have a domino effect instead, but we don't have like another group of extra teachers to kind of hurry up and fill in all those positions. The other thing what I would say is, since computing is becoming so relevant in all aspects of life, it needs to become more relevant in education. In other words, it needs to be a core class. It needs to be treated like math, science, social studies, and language arts. It is a fundamental, important knowledge and skills that every single citizen needs to have. And so without that goal and without moving in that direction, you're going to have people left behind. And so, and part of that, when it's not a core class, that means kids will move out of that opportunity because something else in those other four classes, in some principles, the cases, it becomes more important. And then the next part would just be paying our computer science teachers more so they don't want to go and leave and go to industry.
Yep. Yes, totally agree with everything that you have said. Yeah, we need a magic wand to solve this. So thank you so much for your time, Dan, today. I thoroughly
Thank you.
enjoyed.
Thank you so much.